you hear the word improvisation, what comes to your mind? What do you think of?
Spontaneity. Making it up on the spot. Usually
Right out of the moment.
yeah. Well, no, but there's usually some foreknowledge of the general direction, but all of the details are spontaneous.
Okay, that's a very good term. What else?
Creativity and emphasis points.
Creativity, of course, is one of the key words too. Creativity. You need to be creative to, create music. What else?
Really difficult.
Why?
I don't know, I can't do it. You need knowledge of harmony. A lot of knowledge,
Knowledge of harmony, and maybe that is difficult.
Yes,
But my students say the same when they start, but I mean, learning a language is difficult. If I'm supposed to learn Greek or Russian, I will have a hard time, because those are difficult languages, see? So it is a language, and it can be very difficult.
But it's the idiom, sometimes. The idiom is the heart of it.
Yeah, that too.
Not allowed.
Not allowed? Oh, now we get to the... That's another very good idea. What is not allowed about improvisation?
Well, in opera singing, maybe not useful. Maybe it's useful for the soul, not for the stage.
Sure.
Yeah.
What is the problem if you improvise as an opera singer? What is it? I mean, it's obviously, but...
Yeah, I think too free, not what's written, not what's traditionally done.
Yeah, but that's one of the crucial questions, you know. I mean, when am I allowed to improvise? Of course, in opera, where my voice or my part is dependent on so many other parts. Of course, if everybody improvises, this is not going to be an opera by Mozart or by Gluck or whoever, you know. This is something totally new. Of course, not allowed because it will drop out of the piece. So, improvisation should be used in a certain context. What else do you think when you hear the word improvisation?
You tend to think jazz, don't you?
Yeah. I think that's nowadays probably the most common term that you think improvisation is connected to jazz.
Yeah.
Jazz music is not possible without improvisation.
From audience point of view, like me, let's say, it's so excited. Like I get excited when I see improvisation, while watching.
Okay.
So it's something different for me. And
Okay. But are you not excited to listen to a beautiful Beethoven sonata?
of course,
Sorry, but
of course I do. But at the same time, I mean, you don't expect to have in classical music because people play for the people who knows music. And then for the audience point of view, when we hear something different at the point, it's interesting for us.
yeah, because you don't know what's going to happen.
Yeah.
So it's brand new. With a Beethoven sonata, I'm more excited about how the interpretation is going to be, but I know the piece. I know exactly what's going to happen at the end. With improvisation, when I improvise in concert, I don't know how the piece is going to end. Sometimes I have absolutely no idea how to sort of proceed, you know. So this is exciting for all of us, for the people who listen and for the people who produce the improvisation.
But isn't there though an element of improvisation, name interpretation, because one person's playing is different from another person and that is the result of choice. Is improvisation where you start adding extra
That's a good question.
sounds?
That leads to the first idea of spontaneity, you know, that I could say the things that I play in my interpretation, they are planned, you know. I plan to do the ritardando at this point, so they are not improvised anymore. Of course, some artists do that, you know, it's very dangerous, but they sometimes extend certain phrases or play random ritardando or something like that, but probably not that many do that, because it's dangerous. So I think this is different. On the other hand, when I studied jazz piano, my teacher said there's basically no improvisation at all. It's all in your head already. You have either practiced that pattern or heard it somewhere, and all you do is a sort of patchwork of putting the things newly together, but it's actually not completely created new. So I don't believe that. I'm 100% sure that I've improvised some stuff that I've never done before, but I mean, who knows? We are not completely aware of how our brain works and what we have in mind. I mean, all of us have so much access to music nowadays. You know, we have a lot of melodies in our head and listen and practice, and yeah.
But it boils down, in my opinion, to how small the building blocks are. Yeah, we've all got building blocks because we all know all the notes on the piano, right? So therefore we can improvise. But to the listener, I know that if I improvise, you probably tell me to stop after about 15 seconds because it's going to be not in tune, with a useless rhythm, it's not going to be engaging, it's not going to be harmonic, and actually it's going to fall apart. There's going to be nothing to listen to.
I'm so sure about that.
I'm pretty sure. Unless you want Mary having a lamb, something like that, with his, yeah, Tom. You know, so I think that if I understand what you're saying correctly, then you know, the teachers who are saying to you that your jazz piece is already in your mind before you go on the concert platform, whilst you might not know exactly how you'll join these blocks together, and it might depend on the moment, you have the blocks. You have bigger building blocks than, you know, let's say a C major triad and a G major triad and so on. So you've got lots of going back to your conversation about language, you know, I mean, we have certain conversations that we do without even thinking about it, don't we? How are you? Very well, thank you. Nice to hear you. What are you doing there? You know, we don't think about it here because there's a conversation already there. And if there's ever a pregnant pause, you can throw that in and make it sound interesting. So yeah, I suppose it's an invention using blocks. It's like an architect who knows the building materials he has at his disposal. He doesn't necessarily know what type of building he's going to build, but he knows that he's got steel, wood, glass, aluminium, and how to join them.
So, yeah, thank you for saying that, because that's exactly what I teach. You know, I teach how to create what's that in English? A market where you can buy all these things. You know, as you said, steel, wood, glass for the windows, frames for the doors, and everything else. So that's actually my major work. But what I cannot do is I can give them some ideas how to put it together. There are some forms that work very well, but at the end, the students are the composers. And this is totally different to the lesson of the piano piece, which is already there. You can always refer to the piece. Whereas when I teach improvisation, it's really most difficult because there is nothing there. There's maybe the things we talked about, which we could call a piece of wood, a piece of steel, a piece of glass, but what can I do with them is up to the student. So if they have a bad day or they have no idea, it can be totally senseless, you know, that they start creating and it doesn't work at all, although they have the right material.
So if improvisation is pure improvisation, why does jazz improvisation always sound like jazz, and classical improvisation always sound like classical, and pop improvisation always sound like pop, and rap improvisation always sound like rap or whatever it is, and all these different idioms, they don't ever seem to, well, maybe they do, but they're, you know, you never, let's say, hear a jazz pianist end up in something that sounds like the first movement of the Moonlight Sonata.
Oh, yes, you do. Absolutely. Loads of times.
I would
yes,
say,
and you have jazz pianists because some of them are extremely good at classical music.
I would say Keith Jarrett, for instance, could go in both areas. In his new album, he sort of like he's swaps between classical music and jazz. But what you're talking about is mainly linked to articulation.
Right.
You know, because jazz articulation is focused on something that we call ternaire, that's like three-folded, you know, like the articulation in jazz is on triplets. So this would be in the blues scale. Immediately you feel that it's going to swing. And you hear the scale, and it has 6 notes only, and immediately you think it's jazz, it's blues. So when you improvise in that style, there's no doubt that this is jazz music, see? So this is something that I call a language. It's articulation and a certain amount of notes that jazz musicians use all the time, of course. Whereas when you improvise in classical music, you have other codes, other language skills, which is probably focused more on the classical cadenza. So this is a simple cadence, but in the schools of improvisation, which I will talk about in a minute, people like Czerny or like Bach tell the pianist how to make music out of a simple cadence. In the way Czerny taught Liszt, it's supposed to sound like this. When I talk about how to improvise in classical style. Does that make sense? Yeah. Okay. So we are already jumped into the history of improvisation. So I always ask my students, what do they know about the history of classical improvisation? And of course, there's not so much knowledge, but maybe you have heard of some classical musicians who were also improvising.
I know that like Beethoven was really, really famous for his improvisation. It was him and Hummel were the biggest improvisers of him.
So, but do you know what Beethoven did? What was like?
No, I don't know what exactly, but I just know.
I mean, unfortunately, we don't have any recordings of that time, but we have many people who went to his concerts and wrote down, like in a diary afterwards, what they have experienced. And apparently, this must have been beyond crazy what Beethoven did. You know? First of all, he liked to cheat the orchestra and the audience about the cadence. So in that time, it was normal that the cadence of the piano concerto was always improvised.
Yeah.
So now you can ask, why do we have so many written down cadences by Mozart and Beethoven? The answer is very clear. These cadences were not written for professional pianists. These cadences were written for amateurs. Yeah, sorry to tell you that. Of course, these cadences are very good because they are from the composers themselves.
When you say cadence, you mean
Cadenza.
the
The
cadenza?
cadenza. Sorry,
Okay.
this is the wrong term in English.
Well,
right?
we use cadence as a perfect cadence.
Oh, okay, yeah, then it's
right.
the cadenza.
Okay, yeah.
So the cadenza in the piano concerto. So how can we know this? It's very easy. The sister of Wolfgang Amadeus Mozart was apparently very bad at improvisation. So he wrote some ideas of how to improvise and explained that to her and said you can use this cadenza. This was used anyway for the upper class ladies who are not pianists, who are not professional pianists. So therefore we know that this is the professional pianists were used to improvise the cadence of the concert. So what about cheating with Beethoven? He did the following. When at the end of a cadenza we have, of course, the trill. is the cue for the orchestra that they pull up their instruments and go back in. And Beethoven did apparently, from what the letters of many people of the time tell us, he did this. With a trill, and it must have been a great fun to see the people in the orchestra doing this. And he did this all the time, you know, because they never knew when to come in. And apparently at the end, and this is also a reason why in his composed cadenzas sometimes we have very long trills at the end, even these double ones. So to make absolutely sure that this is the end of the cadenza. So this is a proven fact. This is not just a theory. There's another story about Beethoven when he apparently had also duels with other pianists at that time. There was another one called, I think, Dussek, who invited him to fight with improvisation. He had some notes written down and started, and everyone liked it very much. There was a lot of applause. And Beethoven came and looked at his grand piano, took his notes, went to his grand piano, turned them upside down, and started to play. And that was a way of humiliating him so much. And of course, he was really the greatest improviser at that time. So at the end, no one wanted to hear the other pianist anymore. So, yeah. So Beethoven surely was a great improviser. Chopin. What do you know about improvisation in Chopin's music?
That he wrote most of his dances for. He's never actually performed in his music, or rarely so in public. What he enjoyed most is to play his improvisations in public.
This is very interesting because in the music of Chopin we can see something that is not that visible in Beethoven's music, which is one of the most important things in improvisation at all. And this is called an improvised introduction. At that time it was very common, actually up until, let's say, 1800 or even later, it was common before you start your piano performance to do a warm-up in front of the audience.
Prelude.
Yeah, a prelude. The idea of a prelude is a warm-up. So in many Chopin pieces, we have in the introduction a written down improvisation before the actual piece starts. With nocturnos or even the scherzo. So we ask, why are these two chords? You know, what are they good for? This is opening or like warming up, or this. So this is just as an introduction to warm up the fingers and then to get the audience into the key actually. So Chopin was definitely great at doing this. If you want to have an idea about going back to Beethoven, how Beethoven improvised, have a look at the Choral Fantasy. It's not a very famous piece. It's for grand piano, orchestra, choir, and 4 soloists. And it has a very long introduction by the piano. And apparently that is literally a written down improvisation by Beethoven. He always used to improvise that piano introduction. There you can see how crazy this idea was to improvise in that really difficult style. Another thing you should know about Beethoven is that in his 5th piano concerto, there's a comment written by him which says, basically translated from Italian, don't improvise the cadenza. And many people take this as a sign that you should not improvise cadenzas at all. But this is wrong, because Beethoven used that comment only for that particular cadenza, because that is sort of woven into the composition. It doesn't mean that you're not allowed to improvise any other cadenzas. But it's important to know because that belongs to the piece, so it is a composed cadenza. So we talked about Beethoven, Chopin, Bach. Who else could we think about?
Schubert.
Schubert did improvise a lot. Apparently, when he composed, he improvised before he composed, he improvised to get some ideas of how a melody could sound like. So he sat down on the piano and tried to find some melodies. Apparently not in public, because he was not a pianist like
Apparently
Chopin.
his song cycles, he wrote them very, very, very quickly.
Yeah.
To the point he's almost improvising in his mind, straight on the table without the piano.
That's also a very nice comment. Schoenberg says that. Schoenberg says composition is improvisation in slow motion. That's what Schoenberg says about improvisation. But there's one big name here.
Liszt?
Yes. Liszt was probably the latest great improviser. So there we know a lot more how he improvised. What do we know there about Liszt's improvisations?
Based on operatic tunes.
Why?
Because operas was so important back then. Like people preferred it to piano music. So.
But I mean, why didn't they go to the opera to listen to the original piece? Why?
Well, because they did go, but opera was not like people would go in to hear one singer and then they would leave. It was more like an event, and they would go to meet other people. It was like a public place rather than a sit-down performance thing.
Exactly. So this is it was a different time, and at that time people had no recordings, as well. So Liszt was actually doing this as a marketing thing as well. Also for Schubert, he played a lot of this Schubert transcription and made Schubert a lot more popular than he was at that time. And this is like commercial basically. And with opera tunes, it's the same. So in some concerts when Liszt played, we have at that time a program that says basically nothing. It says Franz Liszt plays piano. Not what? Why? Because he didn't know either what he was doing. It's like he started maybe with a piece by Bach, then he played one of his compositions, and then the rest of the evening he improvised on demand of the audience. So sometimes the people in the audience sang a tune and he picked it up and made this improvisation. And we can see this idea in his paraphrases. If you look at the Rigoletto paraphrase, you have an improvised introduction, and the theme comes never at the start, it always comes later, because you need to warm up and things like that. So,
can I ask you, it seems to me that, I don't know for sure, but it seems like Liszt would be one composer that would write in his improvisations in a number of pieces.
Sure.
And
absolutely. All these ornaments that we see in the piece, stuff like that you see in every composition by Liszt, it's a written down improvisation. And we can be sure that he has done it different every time he performed this.
Yes.
So this is...
There is a Hungarian edition of Liszt works from Budapest,
Yes.
and in parentheses underneath the scores they will write Maestro from his students who were in the concerts. Maestro used to play it like this, and they would be in quotes showing his version, how he actually played
exactly.
it. And sometimes there will be two references from different students from different concerts.
But this is a proof for that,
Yes.
that this has been different. And it's also interesting because at that time it was a totally different idea of a composition. Nowadays we focus on urtext because we want to understand that certain time and we want to understand that language. But at that time the people copied and changed and re-improvised, so they had not as a strict idea of urtext as we have nowadays. was much freer at that time.
Does improvisation happen at all vocally?
It does, but as mentioned before, it's a different context. Because the origin of improvisation, of course, is not derived from the piano, because the piano is historically a very young instrument. Of course, the very first improvisation must have been vocally, or with other very simple musical instruments. There's
Essentially, contemporary composers use a lot of singing vocal improvisation.
Yeah.
Because I think it's, I mean, overall, I think our knowledge of harmony is getting weaker and weaker.
Yeah.
Or at least this is the trend I see. But vocal improvisation is a lot easier.
Yeah.
To do, I guess, and so in a lot of contemporary compositions, there's vocal.
Yeah, it's coming back again, but of course in jazz again it's also very big because there everybody needs to improvise and know how to improvise. But yeah, the origin of music, some people say, was improvisation, because before you have to, I mean, also the writing down things is not that old. As we talked about it, before people try to remember everything in their mind, and you have to decide for a certain version that you want to remember before everything is improvised. So improvisation is maybe the origin of music. One thing that we shouldn't forget is about improvisation, it was not used only as a prelude to warm up, it was also used as a connection, which is also very interesting. So at the time of Mozart and Beethoven, it was apparently impossible to play two pieces in different keys without connecting them through a prelude or a short improvisation. Let's say you play this sonata by Mozart, followed by another Mozart sonata, let's say E flat major. So you could not end like this, and then you have to do something like to connect them. See, but this was very common apparently at that time. So if you want to have a look at these connecting things, also have a look into the Salzburg edition of Mozart, which was done by Robert Levin, who's also a great artist and a brilliant improviser in classical style. So this was another use of improvisation within the concert. So yeah, so far for the historical view. So first we have to talk, before I answer your question, about why is improvisation not part of the learning process of a classical pianist nowadays? Why is it more or less, I would say, forgotten? I asked you questions, you said, I asked you what you think if I say improvisation, jazz, creativity, but no one said cadenza or something that is connected immediately to classical music. I have not learned it myself. I taught myself, but I didn't learn it from a teacher. So
this kind of reference to classical music now, I mean, because it is classical, it is from the past. Whereas at the time when it was current, this was what people were doing at the time, musicians recorded a lot more trust. The composer had a lot more faith in the musicians and trust that they could fill in the gaps. So you have figured bass and stuff that allowed some discretion.
Okay, but I could say nowadays the musicians are technically much more perfect than in the old times. So why could I not trust as a composer that they can play?
Because achieving perfection at interpreting something that's spelled out in every syllable is not the same as being able to elaborate on a theme or to rearrange.
But that's one of the crucial things. Nowadays, we are focused on perfections, which we have to because it is a competitive world. You know, if we want to survive, somehow we need to compete, first of all. But on the other hand, if you focus on one thing to be perfect, you lose on the right and left side other things. And this is actually what's
I
happening.
think it's also partly audience expectation that now it's not only that the performers who have this kind of reverence for the syllables as they were spelled out, and they are lucky. But the audience creates that expectation. You know, it's a feedback thing. So people don't expect when they go to a classical concert that there's going to be anything that they're familiar with the piece that they hadn't heard before.
Do you have any idea why this expectation is so set on that?
On the DVD, the recordings.
Yeah. So some people say that the recording itself has killed the improvisation because the recording shows us every day, whatever we want, in every second that we want, how this piece should sound like. So there's a recording is always perfect because it's unreal. We all know that. You know, we can go to the studio, record over and over. Bar 57, you can record it 200 times until you play it right. So, I mean, everyone could do that, you know. So we listen to an artificial product which is perfect to our ears, you know. So that makes us forget the playfulness and imperfection that improvisation has. Improvisation is imperfection.
Also, I think we have a low tolerance for things that are completely ephemeral these days. We want stuff that's like a possession, and any kind of music that has any genuine element of improvisation in it is not a possession. It's like an ephemeral thing. It's an event that happens, and once it's passed, it's passed. You were either that or you weren't that.
Exactly.
And you can't possess it afterwards.
Yeah, not like a piece of art or so, you know. It's like a painting or. Yeah, so that might be some of the major reasons why improvisation in classical music is not there anymore. Mostly because it is also not taught anymore. I mean, how could I, as you said before, I'm afraid to improvise. Why? Because I don't know what I should do or what I can say about, like a language. Where do I put my words?
So you said it's not taught anymore, but Chopin was a great improviser. He didn't teach his students to improvise. He used to teach them his compositions.
Exactly. He taught improvisation. We know from Mozart, it's proven that he taught improvisation. And we know from Liszt that a piano lesson with Liszt is very well documented. It started with a piece of Bach first, then a composition by Beethoven, then maybe something by Liszt himself, and then improvisation and harmonical work, harmonical chord progressions on the piano. So this was part of the normal piano lesson. And we know this also because there is a link between Beethoven and Liszt, which is Czerny. Czerny himself wrote a big book about improvisation, which he has learned from Beethoven. And Czerny, taught Liszt how to improvise. And because Czerny was a good teacher, apparently, he wrote everything down that he did. And Liszt did the same for his students. But this doesn't tell us why this is forgotten. No, it is forgotten because, first of all, this is my thesis, it's not proven. Because we have a lot of recordings, we have a lot of focus on perfection, and last but not least, we live in the 21st century now. We have access to so much music. I mean, why should I improvise if I can play 32 Beethoven sonatas? it's great music. I cannot do better than Beethoven. I cannot do better than Chopin. Why should I improvise?
Why not? Okay.
This is the question Katja asked. What should be the advantage for you guys to improvise? Why is there a good, from my point of view, a good chance for you when you improvise?
For example, to have a hint how the composer actually wrote his pieces.
Exactly. That's one of my major thoughts when I teach improvisation. I don't try to teach you how to be extremely creative. First of all, improvisation for me nowadays is a key to understand a piece of music. When you know about harmony, about the improvisation process within Chopin's and in this music, you will understand and teach your students later on in life much better, because you understand everything that you hear and everything that you play.
Can you give us an example?
For instance, when you know, talking about the cadence, there's a good piece by Schubert called Der Wegweiser, which means the road sign. And this song talks about, there's one part saying, it's difficult to translate, eine Straße muss ich gehen, die noch keine geht, so means I have to go to a road and I can never turn back, which is a symbol for life. You know, life goes on, we can never turn back. And Schubert writes the following thing. You see the bass is going up, and this is sort of referring to the text, because life goes on, we cannot go back, you know. So I can play this and say, oh, this is nice, this is a nice idea, but then I'm not fully into the music. Whereas when I study this modulation, which is called, we call this an omnibus, because it goes on, you know, like. So when I study this and improvise it, I can first of all hear it in every piece when this is used, and this was used by Chopin, by Schumann, by many other composers. Secondly, I feel it, and I have a much closer approach to the composition when I improvise this. And last but not least, it's much more fun to improvise that chord progression than just playing it in a theoretical, you know, like, this is dead, there's no music. Honestly, I forgot everything from my theory lessons that I did not improvise. So if you just play the chord progressions, it will go in here and leave here in a second. But when you play this, maybe like... All I'm adding is a little bit of rhythm, broken chords, dynamics, and suddenly the theoretical thing comes alive, and it's a lot of fun. You will hear it, you will feel it, and then you understand the idea, what was behind that composition. So that's why I'm teaching improvisation, mainly. And secondly, it's because, of course, I want to my students to improvise their own cadenzas in the piano concertos and also in the sonatas. You know? In a Haydn sonata where you have a fermata close at the end, it was also common to improvise a small cadenza. So I think life is so much more fun when you know what actually is happening inside the music, and when you are able to re-improvise or to reproduce this idea by yourself and add this to your own musical ideas.
Do you think it's possible for anybody to learn, or do you think it's...
That's another very good question. Channy says up to 50-60% is learnable. The other 40 to 50% is a matter of talent. But when I look at my students, the people who are musical, you know, all of you guys are musical. All of you have an access to musical process, you know, feeling. Because feelings can never be taught, you know. So if you have that feeling, you are most likely to have a feeling or an ability for improvisation too. It's a very simple thing. Everyone can do it. Sure. So this is one thing, and the second thing is don't be too critical with yourself at the beginning. You know, most students think, "Oh, this sounds so bad. Let's get back to the real piece." But if you stick to the idea and follow it, then you will.
So how did you learn? You said you learned by yourself. So is that what you did? You read
Honestly, when I was a young boy, I had a hard time reading music. I was quite slow at the start. So I had a very strict teacher, and he said, "You need to learn this piece by heart next week." And I was like, "Oh my God." So I was very young. I was maybe 7 years old or so. So she was very strict. So improvisation was my escape, actually. First of all, to fill the memory lapse, you know, sort of filled with some things that I sort of made up. And secondly, I had this was like my world of escape, where I could walk without my strict teacher, you know, and having no one behind me telling me what to do. So I used it as an escape. Later on, right now I'm quite good at reading music, of course, but it took me a while. So. Everyone would think this is a piece by Debussy.
Yeah.
But I'm just using his language. His language consists of, in this case, of 6 notes. Whole tone scale. Yeah. Another thing I learned about Debussy is the ability to switch a certain chord. For instance, a dominant 7 plus 9. So I'm using that chord and transpose it to anywhere I like.